Hi everyone, welcome to another film log update video. So yes, this time number 2 in this series, and yes, this series of course is something that I started very recently. I covered of course October and November films last year. Just in terms of what I watched, kind of thing here, and this series, the intention was really to relaxingly kind of talk about collectively certain films that I watched over different months. This could be films that I don't plan on reviewing. That's one of the reasons why I started this. Because I can't review every film I watch. I watch a film every day. That could just be a short. And that's at least a film every day. I just can't. I can't review all the films on the channel. That I watch, but this is a kind of a nice little thing to kind of gloss over at least, and just at least briefly mention, to discuss, to give credit into films that I've been watching. I may not cover every single film that I've watched in all these days. Again, I might not even mention these films, certain ones, but generally this is ones that I would like to mention, perhaps that I might not review on this channel anytime soon. And I may not review ever, or could be films that I do plan on reviewing, or just have reviewed as well, that I just would like to mention as a kind of collective experience of what I've been doing, film wise, of course, over the last few months, of course. So December last year, of course, January and February this year. Starting off, of course, the 1st of December last year, and of course, it was The Irishman. That's the first film that month that I watched, and of course, a big film that I reviewed on my channel, in December. So that's a film, of course, blew me away, and it's one of my favourite, Scorsese films, and I just had a wonderful time with that, and that was kind of linked to another film I watched a few days after, and that was, of course, Once Upon a Time in America. I rewatched that film. I've seen it before, of course, and that was the one that I kind of wanted to watch very shortly after The Irishman, for a number of reasons. But other films I watched in December include Jason and the Argonauts, the '60s version, and this is a good film. I enjoyed it. It had definitely had a few flaws. It just wasn't too much standout for me, really. I was kind of disappointed in some of the characterization, but generally it was a fun, kind of fantastical experience, and I love the action scene, of course, the very famous kind of stop motion, of course, action sequence with the skeletons. It was just really amazing to see. I loved that moment. Other than that, I don't think I loved the film, but it's a good film that I'd recommend, and that was very interesting to see. National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, that was another film I watched. Again, of course, seen that film many times. I don't really plan on reviewing it yet, at least, but it's a great film in my opinion. It's of course one of the many Christmas films that I watched. Over this time, I watched quite a few. Of course, Home Alone, another one, but I reviewed that on the channel. So yeah, not much more to say there. And yes, going further on into the month of December, there's a bunch of films that I rewatch, at least most years, really. It's kind of films that I traditionally watch, at least in December, or around this time, of course. And another film here, that's kind of related to some of them films, is Castaway, of course. Tom Hanks, Robert Zemeckis. This is a film. It's one of his films, that I've seen many times, and it's a film that I've not talked about on the channel, really. I've never reviewed this film, and I think I was left too emotionally drained, actually, to kind of review this film, in December. Who knows? I might review that in the future, but for the record, it's one of my favourite films. I think it's, another masterpiece from Zemeckis. This is, one of my actual, kind of very favourite films, to be quite honest. And it's not a film that, it's talked about too much, really. Maybe the performance and stuff, but really for me, it is one of the greatest films ever made, and I think it's just absolutely mind-blowing, really. It's something else, and it leaves me kind of in this state of, that I've witnessed, and gone through one of the most kind of spiritual cinematic experiences. So yes, Castaway. As I say, might not review that one, but for the record, as I say, it's one of my favourites. So yes. Next up is The World's End. I rewatched that a day after Castaway, and it's a film I like. You could say I really like this film. It's a good film. It's not anything more for me, but I've talked about that film, already on this channel. Not one of my favourite Edgar Wright films, but it's a good film in my opinion. And yes, Die Hard. Of course, I've reviewed that film. Check these out if you want to see in-depth discussions. But yes, I reviewed, of course, Die Hard around the Christmas time. One of my favourite films of all time as well. And yes, Touch of Evil. This is a film by Orson Welles. That's very, very acclaimed and stuff. Of course, it's cited as one of his best films, and of course, I've seen Citizen Kane, which are my favourites, of course, and I've seen The Third Man, which Orson Welles, had a role in, of course, and he did write his lines in that. But other than that, I'd never really seen too much Orson Welles films. But yes, Touch of Evil, very, very good film. Not a great film for me. I think it's definitely flawed. Just personal preference really here. I didn't think it was anything mind blowing really. The opening scene really that is, and I think I think Janet Leigh is brilliant in this film. There's some of the performances I'm not a huge fan of. Charlton Heston being one, but I'm a fan of him in general. I think he was a great actor, but there's just things in this I didn't respond to too much, and it doesn't. It's one of them noir films that kind of doesn't quite come together in the way that I kind of expected. But yeah, it's a very, very good film with some great cinematography and some really atmospheric moments. But yes, I watched a few short films as well. We won't really talk about them too much. Trip to the Moon, though, being a notable one, and I do like that film definitely. The Polar Express, of course, I rewatched that around Christmas. Again, I've reviewed that film. I'm not going to re-review that film, but you can kind of see my thoughts on that when you check out my review. But yes, then I watched some of the other films I watched. 21 Jump Street. I've seen that a few times, and I'm a big fan of that actually. As far as kind of modern comedies go, it's actually one of my favourites, to be quite honest. And yes, a film here, next up, one that I would mention. One of my least favourite films, really. It's called Now You See Me. It's quite a well-known film, I was not a fan of this at all. Wow, a painful experience. I found it really, really boring and just lifeless in my opinion. I just didn't connect to this film at all, and it just kind of irritated me and bored me, and it was just all over the place. I just didn't like this film at all, and it was quite a painful experience. Just in my opinion, I was not a fan of that. It's one of the sort of 5 worst films I've seen, really. If you want thoughts on that, in the last sort of year and a half, really, that I've watched, really. So yes, not a big fan of that. I watched a few documentaries as well. Around this time, I watched Scorsese's Goodfellas, which was interesting to see, and I also watched The Irishman in Conversation. That was very very nice to see as well. And yes, a few more rewatches here. Drive, a big fan of that film. I love it. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. And that and Bronson are my favourite my favourite reffing films. They're both stunning in my opinion, and Drive certainly is a masterpiece in my opinion. The Departed, of course, Scorsese film that I've talked about before, of course, and yes, I've seen it many times. Again, I love that film. It's one of my favourite Scorsese's, really. But it's a film that I've already reviewed, so we won't talk about that too much. Again, Django Unchained, I've reviewed that film. I watched that a few days after Christmas again, and with family, and yes, just one of my favourite films of all time, and right up there near the top of the Tarantino kind of ranking for me personally. And Slumdog Millionaire was the day after that. That was a film again I've reviewed on this channel. So yes, that's nothing more to say there, really. Little Fockers, I've reviewed the first 2 in this trilogy. I watched Little Fockers as well, and again, and I've never been a fan of that film too much. I think it's an average film. It's very it's quite annoying at times, and it just doesn't match up to the first 2, especially not Meet the Parents. I watched that again, and just not a big fan. But I don't dislike that film. It's okay, I guess. So yes, and It's a Wonderful Life. That is a film again I've reviewed, and I wanted to re-review it, but I thought it's nice to kind of leave that and just maybe not review that again. It's one of my 20 favourite films of all time. Of course, just absolutely stunning in my opinion. And a few days before New Year, of course, watching that film. Next up is Airplane. A film that I've reviewed as well. I love that film, and it was the first time But I'd seen this all the way through, of course, that New Year's Eve, and I just absolutely love that film. I think it's one of my favourite comedies of all time, really. So yeah, check out my review on that again. And next up is Anchorman, the first one, of course. I've seen the second, but yeah, the first one. I'll be honest. The first time I saw this film, I didn't love it. I didn't really like it too much. I was kind of maybe not in a great mood when watching it, but I've come around to the point where now I do think it's a really really good film actually, and I do really like this film. I mostly love the film actually. It's just a very very charming film. It's full of just enjoyable characters. I'm a big Will Ferrell fan. I know a lot of people of course are not, but I do find him very very enjoyable, and there's not really too many films that I've seen anyway where Will Ferrell is not enjoyable, and Anchorman for me is one of his best kind of films really, and just a really really enjoyable film. The second one is not as good for me. It's definitely it's got a lot of problems in my opinion, but this one actually is very very good, and I like it now more than I've done in the past. The Haunted Castle, I reviewed that film as well. And yes, next up, is a very, very special film for me, the original, The Italian Job, and of course, Michael Caine. This is a film I'd seen so many times as a kid, and for some reason just never watched it, of course, in the last maybe even 10 years. So I thought, I've got the Blu-ray, I've got access to that, and let's just watch this film, and I really couldn't wait, of course. And yeah, I love this film. It really is a great one, in my opinion. And it has some issues in the first act mainly, and some of the parts I didn't enjoy, too much, or at least as much as the rest of the film. I've never really done. But yes, once that kind of first 30 minutes, it's very, because it's very, very just. I think it could have been, more energetic and stuff, and it wasn't exactly the best of opening acts, but it's got its moments, of course, and it's always very, very enjoyable. At least once you have that kind of first, setup act, I think from then on the film just gets better and better with each kind of passing, 10 minutes to the point of the final act, which is just it's one of the most pleasing, kind of upbeat, hilarious, and just joyous celebrations in cinema. Really, actually, I love this this final act, and I love this film. It's one of my favourites, and I think that the last 10 minutes is just stuff of legends. That is just amazing. The Self-Preservation Society song is one of the most hilarious but brilliant songs that I've ever heard, and of course that's used in the final moments, of course, and just when that comes on, all is well. All is well, and I think it's just brilliant film. This Michael Caine's one of my favourite actors, and The Italian Job, the original, not the remake. Not a fan of that one, unfortunately, but yeah, the original is just amazing in my opinion, and it's got this British charm to it that just it's so enjoyable to see. And Michael Caine, one of the coolest guys, really for me, and just another one of his great films, in my opinion. So yes, a few short films again here that I won't really talk about. A Matter of Life and Death. I've mentioned that recently. I love that film. One of the best films I've ever seen. I want to review that. Definitely. I just want to rewatch it first. So yeah, Pound Press Burger. I'll be exploring quite a bit. This year. So yes, Steamboat Bill Jr. again. I've reviewed that film. Buster Keaton. Yes. Christine, I mentioned very recently again, John Carpenter film, and it could be my favourite. It's maybe my second favourite. That and The Thing. Very very close actually for my enjoyment. But again, one of my favourite films of all time, and that was just such a wonderful experience. That to watch that film. It's such a wonderful film. It's tragic, but it's just so charming and enjoyable. So yes, Christine. A few films here again, more short films. The Naked Gun as well. I watched. I've reviewed them. The trilogy, the Naked Gun trilogy, of course. Yeah, just just a great trilogy in my opinion, and definitely, if you haven't seen them films, definitely check them out. It has my recommendation. So yes, another film I want to mention here is Hereditary, and yes, this is a film that I've been looking forward to seeing. It's a film by, of course, Ari Aster, and yes, he also made very recently Midsummer, and it's another film I really want to check out. But this is a film, Hereditary. It's been praised, so much, and it's something that I really wanted to see. I had access to it on Blu-ray, and I sat down to watch this. Yes, in January as well, and wow, what a film that is! I don't know how I can really review that film on a first watch because it's very, very surprising and very, very different. I didn't know how to feel when watching a lot of this film because just how I was feeling about this film because it's so insane, it's so different and disturbing in a particular way that I thought, I'm loving this film. I revealed that. I think it's a great, great film. I think it's just one of the most unbelievable, really, horror films I've seen in recent years. It's so disturbing, and the first half an hour I was just so invested in, and then it takes a kind of there's a big event there just after that, and it just throws you off. It did for me anyway. And, it's just one of the most intense films that I've seen in a long, long time, and I think the way the film ends as well, one of the most bold endings that I've seen in a long, long time. I think this is a truly wonderful film, Hereditary, and I might review that film certainly, but it would have to be rewatched because there was so much of this that I didn't know how to kind of process because it was so intense in a particular way, and it was just so kind of going different ways, but the ending came together in a way that I was very, very impressed with how bold it was and just very different in the way that kind of yes, things happened, things came together. It was something that really just blew me away, really, and a great, great film. If you want my thoughts on that, so yeah, going more into January here, Escape from New York. I mentioned that, of course, very recently. Rewatching that, it happened one night. Of course, Frank Capra film with one of my favourite actors, Clark Gable, and yes, this film. I'd never seen this before, had been wanting to see it for years, and it's the best first watch of 2020 for me so far. I absolutely adore this film. It's one of the most wonderful, pleasing films, of all time for me, and just right up there with my favourites. Really, I think I will review that film. Hopefully this year. I want to rewatch that film again though, just to kind of fully, get everything I want to say on that. But for now, brief thoughts is, I think it's absolutely stunning, an absolute masterpiece in my opinion, one of the best films ever made. And yes, next up is The Meaning of Life, of course, and this is a film, the Monty Python crew, sadly, we must say, of course, Terry Jones passed away very recently, and I watched this film because, I was in the middle of kind of watching the Python films, and I loved Holy Grail. That film's gone up, over the past few months of, watching that film last year. It's just grown on me more and more. I'd definitely increased the rating. Life of Brian, I did like as well, and this was the next one to kind of watch, and I watched this film, and I think I like it more than Life of Brian. Actually, I think it's a truly hilarious film, wonderful film, great film, and a few days later, after watching this for the first time, I heard the really sad news, of course, that Terry Jones had passed away. So it really hit me, and yes, of course, commiserations, and just a great thank you to all those involved in these films, and of course Terry Jones. Just wow, what a shame, to hear of his passing. But just a wonderful film, and I might review that on a rewatch as well, because I really loved that film, honestly. And yes, They Live, again, I've mentioned that film very recently. This is one of my favourite Carpenters as well, and yes. Next up, we'll quickly mention this, 300 Rise of an Empire, and yes, I really like 300. It's grown on me more and more actually. Since I rewatched it fairly recently, actually. And 300, yeah, it's a really enjoyable film actually, and quite interesting in its visuals. And this film I didn't expect much from the sequel, but yes, it really was even worse than I thought it'd be. I think it's one of the worst films I've seen. Again, in a long, long time. I really did not like this film, and yes, completely boring. Just devoid of any emotion, really, and very, very few things to praise really. Eva Green, it's unfortunate that she was given such a kind of a not very good character to play, because she's a really great actress. But this film just didn't work for me, at all really. There's a few things that are decent about the film, maybe some of the action, but generally it just is a mess, and it looks very, very depressing, and it just isn't good in my opinion. Really bad in my opinion. Sequel to actually a very impressive film, to be quite honest. So yeah, 300. Rise of an Empire. I did not like that film at all, personally, but it's fine, of course, if people do. It just wasn't for me. And yes, another film here, Prince of Darkness. I mentioned that very recently, so not much to say there. But it's an okay film for me. John Carpenter, of course, not one of his best films for me, personally, but again, not my least favourite. From Carpenter. Another film I watched recently from Carpenter that I think is worse than this is Escape from LA. Again, that's not a bad film in my opinion. Overall, I think the first half is actually it's okay. It does go off, of course. It's not a film that I've ever really liked. I think it's very much a mediocre film in my opinion. Just not. Not as bad as maybe it's made out to be, just in my opinion. But that's definitely worse than Prince of Darkness. These two films, of course, being some of the recent Carpenters that I kind of rewatched kind of thing. But yeah, next up, Red River. I mentioned that in my Rio Bravo review, of course, because, well, John Wayne, and of course it's a Howard Hawks film. It's a film that I had in my collection for a while, and I think it's a great film. Personally, I loved it. It was the first time viewing, of course, and really, really good stuff here. I think it's a great film. It's got its flaws for me, but that will probably be discussed in a future review, because I do plan on reviewing that film at some point. I would like to rewatch it again this year, and hopefully have a review for that. Not my favourite from him, because of course, very shortly after that, I watched Rio Bravo, and Rio Bravo, of course, is my favourite Hawks film now. It's an absolute masterpiece in my opinion, and yes, Red River is definitely a great film for me, and another Hawks film that I did love. And yes, the day after that I watched High Anxiety, a Mel Brooks film, and yeah, it's of course not one of his most loved films. I didn't expect it to be kind of this legendary film necessarily, but I did expect more. I did not like this film at all. I was not a fan. In the slightest, personally. It just didn't work for me. But that's just my opinion. Personal preference. It didn't entertain me at all, and it was just it was quite it was quite painful to watch this one. I didn't enjoy it at all, and of course it's being a spoof of Hitchcock. Something that I would have got. Of course the humour and stuff. In terms of what it's trying to say. It just was the way it was handled. Just wasn't in the slightest bit funny for me, personally. But I will check out at some point, in the future, one day, some Mel Brooks films. But that film didn't do it for me. Next up is Fun with Dick and Jane, a Jim Carrey film that I've seen before, and yes, it's a very good film in my opinion. It's quite panned, but a lot of Jim Carrey films are the comedies. I really, really like this film. You could say I loved it actually, and I've seen it many, many times as a kid. I might review that film at some point, because Jim Carrey is an actor who just I'm a big, big fan of, and I think it'd be great to talk about most of his films at some point. But yes, Fun with Dick and Jane. Of course, it's a remake, and I've never seen the original. But this film here, with Jim Carrey, really, really enjoyable, and very, very, very funny indeed. Next up is just nearing at the end of January now. Get Carter. Get Carter is one of the most, maybe one of the 5 most disturbing films that I've seen ever. Actually, just in certain ways, it's very, very disturbing, very graphic, and just really, really, very powerful. This film, I did not expect, what I got really, but I'd call it a great film, definitely, really, really stunning film. Bruce Almighty, a film that I love personally, another Jim Carrey, quickly mentioned there. Metropolis I reviewed, very recently, and I really like that film, of course. And yes, Ip Man 2, of course. I've seen Ip Man, and I saw that last year actually, and for the first time. That film is a masterpiece in my opinion. The second one, not as good, but a great film for me. I did love this one again. The second half, it does some weird things, and, in my opinion, and the way the kind of villains come into it, maybe a bit kind of caricatural villains, in my opinion, but the message at the end is a really wonderful message that I loved. Of course, Donnie Yen once again. He is amazing, and I think the first half of this film, again, it's just amazing. Top end of the 90% mark for me. That, and the rest of the film doesn't quite live up to the first half, but it really does entertain once again. The action is absolutely stunning once again, and yes. A film here next, Roma. Now, this is it's a film that I'd heard so much about, of course, and it's been praised massively. And I think, after watching this film, actually it's surprising this film isn't praised more than it is, because this is an absolute masterpiece in my opinion. It's really one of the most wonderful films that I've seen, of the 2010s. It's so good, and I just loved it from the get go. Even the ending shot, it's such a unique kind of the way that this is presented, and wonderful stuff here with the culture and the struggles, of course, and just the whole the way this film is treated is sincere and truly powerful. Wonderful film, spiritual film, and it has full marks from me, really. Absolutely stunning, and I might review that film eventually. But yes, from then on, a lot of the films have been Bond films. Quickly wrapping up now, near the end of this list of films here. But yes, Doctor No, for example, From Russia with Love. These have been some of the films, of course, that I've been rewatching. For this Bond franchise rewatch. And check out my reviews if you want to see that. But I won't be discussing them really again in this video. The Story of Robin Hood and His Merry Men is a film that I watched as well, and that's a really enjoyable film. It's a Disney film actually. Live action Disney, one of the earliest ones from them. I really like this film. It's very charming and just very enjoyable film. Not my favourite Robin Hood film. That goes to the Errol Flynn 1930s version. That's one of my favourite films of all time. It's an absolute masterpiece in my eyes, and I love that film. But this here, is one of the probably one of the better Robin Hood kind of works actually. Next up, I would really love to talk about this eventually, but Troll Hunter. Now this, you may be thinking, Troll Hunter, what is this? That sounds very silly. Well, it is, but this film, wow, Troll Hunter. It's kind of this this cult film that isn't quite necessarily a cult film yet. Such an enjoyable film. I think this is probably, I'm not a big fan of these found footage films personally, but Troll Hunter, it could be my favourite actually. It's really good. I loved a lot to love here really, and it's just one of these unique experiences. It's definitely a comedy. It's very much a kind of mockumentary, and I just there's so many moments in this that are just hilarious. The kind of troll yell, wow, it's just. I remembered watching this when I was younger, and it's kind of this film that I thought such a weird, obscure film that I've never. Whenever I've mentioned it to people, they've never really heard of it or they've never seen it, and it's kind of this thing. I would say, to people, just people that have never seen this. It's a really hilarious film here, and it's just the only thing I really remembered, concretely, was this kind of troll moment, the yell, and rightly enough, it's exactly as I remembered. Watching it, it's just something that actually does go down in that way, and it's just really great to see. I think the main character is just a brilliant character actually, and this film is unique. It's really very enjoyable, highly enjoyable, and as I say, possibly my favourite found footage film. It's not a genre that I'm really big on, to be honest, but this one really knows how to kind of just create a unique film. It's such an enjoyable film. A few films here like Shadow. I wasn't a big fan of that one. It's from 2018, and I expected a bit more from that. I wasn't a fan actually, and that's a shame. Wuthering Heights, from from 1970. This interestingly stars Timothy Dalton. And I actually really like this film. I think it's a very good film actually, and it's just it's got its flaws. I feel actually, but it's definitely a unique film, and I really liked that one. And yes, Creep, another found footage film, another one that I really liked actually. Recommend it. But Troll Hunter, as I say, is probably the best that I've seen personally. And yes, next up, the last few films here to mention. Next up is actually an Adam Sandler film that I watched, Happy Gilmore. Believe it or not, I'd never seen this film before, and I'm not, the biggest fan of a lot of his comedies, Adam Sandler. But with a film like Punch Drunk Love, I see the potential greatness in him, and he is absolutely amazing in that film. That's a stunning film that I'll talk about eventually. But there's loads of films that I've seen, from him or seen bits of that I'm not personally a fan of. It's just not for me. But Happy Gilmore, one of his earliest works before really he, it's interesting because this is not a character, but he plays is treated in the kind of usual typical way that he's kind of played. We know what the sort of characters that he usually is given. It's very much a big thing. It's always the same. But this film actually is a film that I loved. Believe it or not, I really got invested. I just loved it. It's just real surprise actually. I found it hilarious, and I just got very invested. Of course, and Carl Weathers is in this film. Yes, indeed, and he trains him up. Of course. It's just so enjoyable. And yes, that's about it from me, really. We'll wrap up there. It's something that, yes, it's interesting to do this. Something that it's just simply, kind of my brief thoughts maybe on films that I might not get around to reviewing, in the near future, or just simply, films that I don't really plan on reviewing at all. Certain films that I just, I'd like to kind of, just focus on other films, directors, for example, or franchises, and stuff. And I haven't got the time maybe to review every single film, as I say. And this update video is just nice to do, to kind of just let you know, my opinions may be brief, but just at least let you know on certain films that I've seen, I haven't reviewed, of course. So it's very nice to do and kind of, have this kind of this log, this record, of this kind of my film watching experience. Again, I've not mentioned every single film that I've seen, over these months, because that would take ages. But it's definitely something that at least I mentioned, a number of other films that I haven't really talked about and might not really ever talk about again, at least in review form. So here we are with this. And if you're interested, of course, in kind of seeing more in-depth thoughts about some of these films, I have reviewed, of course, some of these films, and yes, it'd be great to see your thoughts on the films that I've mentioned in this video, and just your thoughts on this this series that I'm doing. And yes, for the next few days, in February, it's just simply going to be some more short films and just Bond related content. Certainly just rewatching the Bonds again, and that's going to take up a lot of my time. It's going to occupy a lot of my time on this this channel over the next couple of months. Probably mid-April really. We're going into there, and possibly some lists that aren't just the ranking video of the Bonds going forward. So yeah, can't wait to do that. But yes, this is a nice little kind of thing here, just to kind of give brief and just honest thoughts on some particular films. So yes, thanks for watching. Tell me your thoughts on these films that I've mentioned, perhaps, and just any cinema related discussions, of course, as always, are welcomed. And yes, as always, thanks for watching.